Ladies and gentlemen, old friends, new friends, hackers, builders, believers, change makers in this room, good morning. How are you feeling? I hope all of you have enjoyed the past 3 days of the third edition of Hong Kong Web3 Festival. I'm Lina Wong from Hong Kong Port. Really glad to be your MC today. I still remember the first time I hosted a IEEE standardization stage back into 2023 at the first version of the Web3 Festival. To be very frankly, it's a 3-year journey of learning, changing, evolving, collaborating till now. So it's quite moving. Once again, welcome to ETH Asia Main Conference. Let's give everyone here a round of applause. I'm quite honored to be here to witness the reunion of the ETH community from Hong Kong, Asia, and beyond, and to celebrate the accomplishments we have achieved together, and also cheer up for the sparks and insight will be created during today's event. So if the past 3 days feel like a rocky ride, trust me, hold on tight, because today's session definitely will blow you up and just drive you like a hyperdrive. Before kicking off officially, please allow me to introduce the co-hosts of ETH Asia. This event is jointly initiated by Wanxiang Blockchain Labs, HashK Chain, SNZ Holding, DRK Lab, ETH Panda, Altlayer, and Blockchain Builders Fund. Our strategic partner is Hong Kong Port. And very importantly, this event is supported by over 30 communities from all over the world. Without any of them, we could not see the magic happen here. Let's give them another round of applause. A very quick note, there is another chapter happening outside of this venue, which our communities are having their presentations and their own sessions, which you don't want to miss out. Okay, now I'm very honored to get you through today's agenda. It's mainly structured around 3 chapters shaping Ethereum's journey, from present and collaborative force to the future. What's shaping our decentralized world. Chapter 1 and the first panel of Chapter 2 will happen this morning, and the remaining session will continue after the lunch break till 5 p.m. today. And a quick note, the opening stage is out of this venue. Okay, let's begin today's exciting session by welcoming a visionary leader at the forefront, who is also the backbone of the whole festival. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mr. Du Yu, Executive Director of Wanxiang Blockchain and the General Manager of Wanxiang Blockchain Labs, for the welcome remark. Welcome, Mr. Du.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So, warm welcome to all of you guys in the 4th day of the Web3 Festival, being a long journey. And thank you, everybody, for supporting us for Web3 Festival and definitely for East Asia. So, let me just give a brief introduction about why East Asia. So, East Asia is really a community-driven event in Asia. We try to bring communities, developers along the Asia to Hong Kong to make the Ethereum family reunion in Hong Kong. You know, many of us know the history between Wanxiang and Ethereum and Vitalik. We've been know each other for like more than 10 years. And actually, a few months later, it will be the 10th year of the launch of Ethereum mainnet. So during a long way, we see a lot of innovation came out along the world, especially happening in the Asia region. And because last year, everybody knows DevCon was held in Thailand. And at that event, we see there's a huge developers along the world came to Asia and then try to build the whole ecosystem. And everyone knows that almost all the innovation from the Web3 world came out from Ethereum ecosystem. But because of the policy rotation of the Ethereum official events, probably in the next 2 years, there will be no major Ethereum event hosted by the Ethereum Foundation in Asia region, because DevCon probably 2 years later will be another region, and also Dev Connect this year will be at South America. And so we were wondering how we can continue the momentum created by Ethereum Foundation last year in Thailand, in Asia. So along with all the partners in Asia, all the Ethereum OGs in Asia, like the Wanxiang blockchain, Hashkey, SNZ, DRK Lab, and also East Panda, the community, and blockchain builders. We bring all of them together to host the East Asia event. So we are happy to see that there are so many communities joining us, developers joining us in Hong Kong to make Ethereum great again, especially Ethereum Asia great again. So for the 10 years, I think we all most of us focus on the infrastructure of Ethereum. But there is a lot of challenge we are facing, not only for Ethereum, but for the whole Web3 community, with lack of real-life applications. But you know, there are a lot of great application developers in Asia along the way. So we need to build up more developers in Asia to bring more real-life, real-use applications. So that's why we will keep trying to building the East Asia community. And today, we are very, very happy to have Vitalik from Ethereum, the founder of Ethereum, to join us again in Hong Kong and give his thoughts about the future of Ethereum. What the directions of Ethereum in the future, in the next few years. And also, we are very honored to have Xiaowei from Ethereum Foundation, because there are a lot of upgrade changes in Ethereum leadership. So we are really curious about what the next step for the Ethereum Foundation. So, I will make my speech quick and then leave all the time to Vitalik. So please welcome Vitalik. Thank you.
What a thrilling start. Thank you so much, Mr. Du, for setting the stage for the following speakers and the communities and the builders for everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's a moment all of you have been waiting for. This morning, I saw some of you have been queued up for the entrance very early morning. Without further ado, please join me in welcome Vitalik, co-founder of Ethereum, to the stage to give the speech, Future of Ethereum Layer 1. Welcome, Vitalik. How's it feeling back to Hong Kong?
Good.
What caught your eyes?
Okay, so hello everyone. I hope you've been having a great event at Web3 Festival so far. So the thing that I want to talk about is a very important topic for Ethereum and its ongoing infrastructure development, which is the future of the Ethereum L1. So let's start off by talking about where Ethereum is in 2025 today, right? So today we have about 15 transactions per second at layer 1, right? So we have the gas limit recently increased to about 36 million, and it's increased by probably about a factor of 6 over the last decade. And there's a lot of applications that are happening on it, increasingly seeing a lot of interesting things happening in DeFi, decentralized social, prediction markets, all kinds of different use cases. And we've been, yes, hello. And we've been seeing just the technology continue to mature, the technology continue to become more stable, and at the same time, we've also been seeing about 250 TPS at layer 2, right? So layer 2s have really been speeding ahead in terms of enabling Ethereum scalability, and scalability is something that is really important for our users and just for people's ability to build actual things on top of Ethereum, right? So just one simple example, remember 10 years ago, people were excited about building decentralized Uber on top of Ethereum. And if you think about decentralized Uber, well, imagine you make one, and let's say it has 100 million users, and let's say on average, each user sends or goes on a ride once per day. So let's say you're sending one transaction per day for 100 million users. In a day, there's 86,400 seconds. Divide 100 million by 86,400, and you get about 115 TPS. Ethereum L1 today can still handle 15 TPS, but layer 2 currently can handle 250. So short term, layer 2 has really been growing quickly, and it's been taking on this burden of making it possible to quickly scale Ethereum applications today. And the good news is that in 2025, it's getting much, much better, right? So I have this picture over here, and actually, the 250 TPS number, that's the number at the very bottom of the curve over here, right? So today, we have 3 blobs. 3 blobs is about 375 kilobytes. 375 kilobytes per 12 seconds, about 30 kilobytes a second. Divide by the size of a transaction, you get your 250. But this is all before all of the things that we want to do over the next 2 years, right? So Pectra, the next hard fork, will increase the blob target from 3 to 6, and so the 250 TPS will become 500. Then in Fusaka, the ideal goal is to get to 48. I think there's a couple of different possibilities. It could be less, it could be more. A lot of it also depends on whether we want to target Fusaka in Q4 or be more ambitious and do it in Q3. But the goal is that once we roll out PeerDAS, the data availability sampling technology, we can start increasing the amount of blobs very quickly, right? And then if you push PeerDAS to the optimal level, you can get to 128 blobs. And then if you get to full 2-dimensional DAS, you can get all the way to 512 blobs, right? So we're talking about many tens of thousands of transactions a second possible on layer 2 and happening pretty quickly. In addition to this, also EIP 7702 making a lot of progress. Basically, a big first step in account abstraction, allowing accounts to be smarter, more secure, and do more things in a more decentralized way. So this is all a lot of progress on L2, and this is the result of many years of research, many years of development and work. So that was scaling L2. One of the other really big and really important things that we want to do is we want to scale the L1, right? So what I'll talk about a bit later is a series of steps that we can use to actually increase the gas capacity of the L1 by a very similar amount. So one question you want to ask is, well, why do we need to scale the L1, right? Is L2 not good enough for everyone? And I think there's a couple of reasons here, right? So one of them is that even in a world where everyone is using L2s, actually there's a lot of features that L1 still needs to provide, especially if you want those applications to actually be secure, right? One of the big differences between an L2 and a separate L1 is that you still have some kind of recourse if the L2 fails. And so if the L2 fails, then users will be able to mass exit, they'll be able to move to a different L2, they'll be able to submit fraud proofs. So all of these things, they require some amount of L1 gas. Also, if an L2 starts refusing to include your transactions, you might need to use L1 censorship resistance features. Then moving assets between different L2s, issuing things on L1, also key store wallets, which store your wallet information on L1 so that if you update it, you don't have to update it hundreds of times on each L2, submitting proofs. All of these things, for them to become cheaper, for them to become viable at a large scale, it turns out L1 actually also has to scale by quite a bit, right? Now also, what if we scale the L1 even further, right? So there's a roadmap that's not too difficult by which we can scale the L1 by about 10x. And so we could get the 15 up to 150. And so if you really want, you'll be able to run a full-scale mass market decentralized Uber directly on the Ethereum L1. Or you'll be able to have a really huge number of different hybrid L1, L2 applications that use L1 for what it's best, use L2 for what it's best. What if we scale the L1 even further, right? So the same kinds of techniques that scale the L2, those same techniques can be used to scale the L1, right? L2s scale by taking advantage of the asymmetry between production and verification. The fact that a block can be much, much easier to verify than it is to generate. And so L1 could actually use the exact same technology. So if L1 scales even further, I think one interesting question is like, what are the things that L2s will continue to be responsible for? And I think there's three good answers here, right? So one is hyperscale, basically scaling even further beyond what the L1 is with its data availability. Two is sequencing. So this is like choosing the order of transactions. So this is useful for two reasons, right? One is that there's a limit on how low the latency of the L1 can be. So today, slot time is 12 seconds. In the future, we can reduce it to 8 seconds, ideally 4 seconds. But even 4-second slot times for many applications are not good enough, right? Like if you imagine taking a game and putting the game on chain, and then imagine like you would sometimes just have to wait for 4 seconds, the game would freeze, no one would be able to do anything for until the next slot, right? Layer 2s can help here. Also, layer 2s can protect users from MEV exploitation. And then the third answer is experimenting with different technology, different VM designs, things like Arbitrum stylus, right? So a lot of value there. So short term, 2026, right? Basically, there's a series of proposals that by which we actually can increase the gas limit of the L1 very significantly and do it safely without compromising on node decentralization, right? So one of them is a block level access list. So this basically says a block has to specify, it has to contain the data that it accesses, right? So if a block moves, like say 1 ETH from my accounts to another account, it has to contain what is my address and what is my balance. The reason for this is it lets you parallelize EVM and I/O, right? So it lets you separately do EVM execution and do reading from storage. Then delayed execution. This lets you execute blocks in the next slot instead of in the current slot. And this makes it safer to increase the time spent executing from about 200 milliseconds to potentially 3 to 6 seconds. Multi-dimensional gas for call data, so setting separate limits for execution and for data. This makes it safer, reduces the theoretical maximum size of a block. EIP 4444, which basically means instead of requiring every single node to store the Ethereum history, we use peer-to-peer networks, and we can store the history in a more distributed way, right? And then on top of this, we have Fossil, which is a censorship resistance feature. Basically, it means even if only relatively large nodes are producing blocks, little nodes would still be able to contribute transactions, and they would be able to force those transactions to be included in the next slot. And then also on top of this, account abstraction. So, and then later on, statelessness, state expiry, and then finally using ZK Starks to verify the EVM, right? So the big takeaway from all this is that there's this entire row of technical improvements to the L1. These things have been researched for years, they've been worked on for years, and the end result of them is basically that we can pretty massively increase the amount of activity that could even happen on the Ethereum L1 using very similar techniques in a lot of cases to what L2s are already doing today. So scaling is not the only thing that matters, right? I think in general, we're trying to make Ethereum ready for mainstream large-scale applications. And if we think about this from an L1 perspective, we have to think about the question, well, what does the L1 need to do? What does the L1 need to be? So that if you build that kind of application, L1 can actually support it. So scaling is one of those really big factors. Another big factor is account security, right? So today, a user account is basically controlled by one single private key. And so either you own the private key, and then you have to constantly be worried about what happens if you lose it or if it gets stolen, or someone else controls the private key for you, and then you have to trust them. With account abstraction, we can greatly expand the set of options for users to get more security and more self-sovereignty for their assets, and better user experience at the same time. You'll even be able to do things like, for example, say, if you want to make a transaction with less than 1 ETH, you need 1 key. If you want to make a transaction with more than 1 ETH, you need 2 keys or you need 3 keys. So these are basic things that have been experimented with in traditional finance for a long time. And with account abstraction, like, we can actually start to include them into wallets that users have by default. Quantum resistance, we need a quantum resistance strategy. Account abstraction lets you specify any verification function for your account, and so you can verify quantum resistant signature algorithms. Paymasters, so you can have other people pay for your gas. You can pay for your gas in currencies other than ETH. So this all makes a smart contract wallet properly a first-class citizen in Ethereum, right? And generally, I think the strategy here is that L1 needs to lead, because these are things where L1 and L2 all really need to upgrade at the same time, right? And so if L1 leads, it makes it much easier for L2s to follow along. Now, this diagram I have over here, basically, this is this whole concept of guardians, right? This is something that's been making a lot of progress in the past year. Basically, the question that we're trying to solve is, one of the big things that crypto offers is it offers this high level of decentralized security, ownership, self-sovereignty over your digital assets, right? So you control your digital assets, and your control over your digital assets does not depend on trusting a centralized authority, because, as we saw with Mt. Gox and FTX and many others, centralized authorities can fail. And so the question is, well, how do you not rely on a centralized authority, but at the same time, how do you avoid putting too much burden on individual users to do things that are very technically difficult for them? Like, maintaining ownership of a single private key is technically difficult for people. And so the social recovery and guardian concept basically says, well, we have an account where in that account we specify some number of different guardians. Could be 3, could be 5, could be any number. And these guardians can actually be a combination of different things, right? They can be keys that you control. They can be hardware wallets. Over the past maybe 2 years, we've had a huge amount of progress in technologies like ZK email, which actually lets you create a smart contract account that can only send a transaction if you prove that you have control over an email address. We also have ZK wrappers for government ID, so you can do the same thing for a government ID. And so also, basically, we can take advantage of things that people are already used to in Web 2, accounts that people are already used to dealing with, and we can import that trust into Web 3. And if we make them one of the guardians of an account instead of making it the whole account, then you're able to put some limited amount of trust into them without actually putting all of your trust into any one particular institution. So the space for us to really innovate and really push the frontiers of decentralization and leveraging trust that already exists in the real world is increasing by quite a bit, right? So then what about everything else, right? So L1, some increasingly discourse about what L1 can do to support privacy more. So that's a lot more native support for cryptography. Account abstraction work feeds into that. Upgrading the EVM, also cleaning up the protocol, making the protocol simpler over time. It includes virtual machine stuff. It includes protocol serialization stuff. Single slot finality, so simplifying the Ethereum consensus algorithm, right? So basically, over the past 10 years, we've learned a huge amount about how proof of stake consensus works. And I think 10 years we were still in this very early stage exploring mode, and now we roughly understand the design space. We roughly understand what's optimal, what can be done, and what can't be done, right? And so we can actually take some of those learnings and we can create an ideal protocol that combines quantum resistance at the consensus layer, that combines ideal levels of security. So 50% for synchronous networks, 33% for asynchronous networks, and that has the Tendermint-like finality properties, and at the same time, LMD Ghost-like liveness properties, and that is maximally simple, maximally fast at the same time, right? So these are all things where we've had proposals for about 2 years, increasingly going into implementation. If anyone is interested in contributing to this, the Beam Chain teams have become increasingly active. Feel free to reach out to Justin Drake. He loves nerding out about this stuff even more than I do. So a lot of like really amazing stuff happening at L1, right? So what is the final goal of all of these things to me, right? To me, the final goal is that we want the Ethereum L1 to be the core of the world computer. We want it to be this central place that applications, including financial applications, including social applications, including identity-related, like including things that use the chain as a place to store data. We want all of these different applications to be able to trust the L1, and we want it to be something that can be reliable and really sturdy and stay for a long time. And at the same time, we want it to be powerful enough to actually meet users' needs, right? If you have an ultra secure, an ultra simple, an ultra clean L1, but the L1 is not powerful enough to do anything, then all the applications will move somewhere else. And so all of the applications, they will not actually be able to benefit from the amazing properties that the L1 gives you, right? And so we need to improve the L1 both on security and decentralization and on efficiency and scale. And this is what we're doing. And then this is part of this integrated effort, right? That's about improving the L1, improving the L2, improving wallets, thinking about different ways to access the Ethereum chain, including AI-based ways, improving the application layer to really push the Ethereum ecosystem so that we can actually achieve all of the things that we've been talking about, what we want to do with Ethereum, and do so within several years and do it very quickly and at scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Vitalik, for the very visionary keynote. And thank you, our lovely robot dog and the humanoid robot. I think it's the first time Vitalik gave a speech well, those kind of a company, very cute. And thank you, everyone, and Vitalik for giving such a very incredible keynote, for addressing those questions from the community. Also, those dive deep into the questions and topics, really the concern of the community. For those who just joined our session, don't afraid you didn't miss too much. Let me repeat the topic of chapter 1. It is the latest in Ethereum, everything you want to know. Following Vitalik's keynotes, let's warmly welcome another keynote speaker, Wang Xiaowei, co-executive director of the Ethereum Foundation. Her keynote today themed Ethereum resilience. There are 3 keywords: surviving, adapting, and thriving. A big round of applause to Xiaowei. Welcome to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Xiaowei Wang. I'm co-executive director of the Ethereum Foundation. So today, I'm honored to be here in Hong Kong at East Asia. My topic is about, I want to share the resilience of Ethereum and how this became one of our principles at the Ethereum Foundation when we think about how to make the decisions. So when people talk about resilience in blockchain, they may also usually think about, okay, it's the fault tolerance or it's about the security. But I wanted to extend this idea to bigger. Is that it's like for Ethereum, resilience is about how we learn from the stress, how we learn from the crisis, and how we survive from the shock and adapt to reality, and how we evolve beyond them. So Ethereum is almost 10 years old now, and it grows stronger with each challenge. So let's begin with the technical resilience. So one typical case is the merge. The merge is a series of hard fork that we migrate from the proof of work mechanism to the proof of stake. This transition gives Ethereum to able to save our energy consumption by 99%. And during the whole process, there was no downtime. Ethereum just became proof of stake. Ethereum just changed its core engine from proof of work to proof of stake smoothly. And since then, we follow up with the roll-up-centric roadmap to help Ethereum to scale. So for the EIP 4844 is about how we enable the blob transactions. And it's a big step forward to making the layer 2s built on the Ethereum to be able to afford to create affordable transactions for the real-world use cases. And we were keen to increase more blob count, as Vitalik just gave a wonderful keynote to describe our visions in the L1. So the L1 world also benefits from the multi-client ecosystems. We have at least 5 EL clients, the execution layer clients, and at least 5 consensus layer clients. This provides the users to have many choices about like the client combinations. And how it helped Ethereum is if the bug happened in one client software, then it won't be a single failure for the whole network. Ethereum won't be down if the bug only happened in one client. Yeah, so this kind of redundancy is essential for resilience. Also because the upgrades are modular, we modularize the upgrades into many Ethereum improvement proposals, the EIPs. So when one team is working on one features R&Ds, another team could be working on another features. And when we be able to collect, like to decide like which features we wanted to include in the next hard fork, these other teams, we can able to process the development in parallel. So Ethereum is like an engine that never ends. The ecosystem also. Okay. So Ethereum is not just one company. I'm here from Ethereum Foundation, but Ethereum is not just a foundation. Ethereum is its community. The movement made up by the builders, researchers, designers, and the users across all the containers. This is a global, self-organized community. Keeps Ethereum going. And we also have many innovations in the funding models to be able to make the individual teams to be able to be self-sustainable. So like the new funding innovations, including like Gitcoin, retrospective PGF, and deep funding, which Dinesh will give a good talk after me. And we also thriving from the local meetups and open collaborations. It's from like these kind of big celebrations in Asia, or like some grassroots meetups. Everyone counts. It's like that these infrastructures allowed the community to decide what matters altogether, not just the foundations or the VCs. So I want to talk more about the governance resilience. So Ethereum doesn't have one centralized governance to decide which forks will be in and which features will be in the next hard fork. This is by design. protocol change go through open, transparent, inclusive communication discussions. It's like a very open, transparent forum that if you are code devs, you are researchers, or you are a user, you can find a way to participate in the discussions, or you can follow up with the summary from the all curve devs call right after the meetings. So I can see that sometimes this is not that efficient. This is not sometimes a bit messy when we talk about the features. However, it works, and this set enables us to be able to consider all the small aspects from the people around the world, and reflects the both set of views to the protocol. There are two examples for how the hard forks reflects the collective values. Like when the DAO fork happened in 2016, and then also like the merge happened in 2020. It's like it shows Ethereum community, we don't avoid the disagreements. We discuss them, and compare the trade-offs together, and then make the decisions. The decisions are through this open dialogue altogether. And about the ecosystem adaptabilities, I would say Ethereum isn't stuck in one single use cases. It adapted from ICOs to DeFi, and like NFTs to the DAOs, and nowadays maybe social fi and identity layers. We keep growing, we keep changes. Ethereum wants to change. The culture wants to change. The culture open to innovations. And Ethereum continues to lead the Web3 in active developers. Well, and then, yeah, it's flexible by design, and it is what keeps it relevant. Yeah. So make a small conclusion here. So what makes Ethereum special isn't just its tech or isn't its price, and its ability to keep going. Ethereum's long-term strength doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being resilient. And as we grow we grow stronger from each challenge. And every part of the ecosystem, from clients to communities, plays a role to share the resilience. Okay. Now let's shift to talk about Ethereum Foundation's role. So Ethereum Foundation, layer as the OG of Ethereum's initial growth. Nowadays, we are a source allocator, we are a coordinator, and a long-term steward for the Ethereum ecosystem. So we're not here to control Ethereum. We're here to help it thrive. Our mission is to maximize the resilience during this journey. And we aim to do that, stay in a credibly neutral way, and support builders without directly direct them. So at the Ethereum Foundation, always to be asked to think longer. One of the important principles is that we want to maximize the resilience of Ethereum's both technical side and also the social infrastructure side. The core values of Ethereum Foundation includes censorship resistant, open source, privacy, and security. So we want to onboard more and more users in a way that it benefits from the Ethereum's values underneath. And it also, like, being coordinators, we try to implement this in practice with a neutral, credible way. So as we mentioned about, at the beginning, this year, just recently, we have a new leadership structure change at the Ethereum Foundation. So right now, we have the two co-executive directors, Tomasz, Stanjak, and myself. And so we both believe that having two directors, it doesn't mean that we will increase more bottlenecks to drive the engine. Instead, we want to double the efficiency. And we have some new initiatives are forming right now that I maybe can't say too much today, but things are changing to some way. And I think the Ethereum Foundation will be a bit more opinionated than the past few years in our way we coordinated. But something doesn't change. We will reaffirm our core values in actions, maybe more in actions in this year. And we will also love to support applications growth. It's including the supporting DeFi participation, and also the wallet standards, and also being also the applications growth support. And then the third part is just my personal preference. I hope to be here to connect the Asian community together. So I see this East Asia as a good title with a good ambitious to bring people together. And I see many old friends here and the new faces here. So Asian communities, we have some strengths. We have the very good developer communities in many regional hubs, and how we onboard them to Ethereum ecosystem more efficiently. How we create environments that is welcome to the new blocks. So I think that's what I have been thinking more and more in the last month. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So to close it, resilience is Ethereum's superpower. Not just to hype it. It's not like one single app or killer features, but the collective abilities to grow stronger altogether. And each client teams, L2 projects, wallet developers, translators, educators, and researchers, they all play a role to make it happen. And our job at the EF is to help them thrive. Resilience isn't that just something that you build once. It's something that you have to practice together over time. And that's how we will keep Ethereum thriving. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Xiaowei, for this very visionary keynote speech. As Xiaowei just mentioned, today there are some old faces and also new faces. It's really great to see the communities connected here. And thank you, Xiaowei, again for the keynote speech, for outlining the future directions and also leadership and development of Ethereum. And today we are having another incredible keynote speak from the Ethereum Foundation, who is the newly appointed AI and public goods lead at the foundation. Devansh Mehta to deliver a keynote on deep funding. The topics sound very brief, but I believe the content is very profound. Welcome, Devansh, to the stage. Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks a lot for giving this chance to talk at ETH Asia. It's my first time in Hong Kong, and I'm really enjoying the city of Hong Kong. It's a very unique city where only this small strip people are living, and the rest is all nature. So as someone who likes trees, I really like Hong Kong a lot as a city. So I'll give a quick overview of deep funding, but before that, I'll start with a story. I'm a journalist, so I like stories. I started tweeting every day in October 2022, and there was another event where Vitalik was giving a talk in Berlin. So I tweeted about that event, and after that, he followed me and kept engaging with my content. And I wrote a tweet saying that I'm interested in how we can use AI to quantify impact. And then he got in touch saying, I've been thinking about something similar. And we talked over 5 days, and that became deep funding. So the lesson for everyone in this room is tweet about your ideas. Don't just be a developer working heads down, but also write every single day about what you're working on. So how many of you have heard of Protocol Guild? Can you show of hands, Protocol Guild? Okay, so not a lot of people. So Protocol Guild is maybe what we would call a level 1 complexity guild, where someone gives money into Protocol Guild, and that gets distributed to all the people working on Ethereum's core protocol. So they currently have about $70,000 a year given to 190 developers to Ethereum. So it makes the protocol more secure, because when I speak to a lot of developers, they say that they want to keep working on Ethereum because they get Protocol Guild benefits. So it's been very good that way. So that's what's called a level 1 complexity guild, where you have layer 2s giving airdrop to Protocol Guild that distributes to contributors. What we are trying to do with deep funding is a level 2 complexity guild, where people give money into a smart contract, and that goes into different repos of Ethereum. So there are 34 open source repos in Ethereum, which are very core. These are consensus clients, execution clients. And we try to give money to those repos. So Protocol Guild gives to individuals, we give to repos, which allows for recruitment and forward planning. So that's kind of a quick overview, that how do we actually fund the entire universe of open source software that powers Ethereum. So this is kind of one of my favorite slides about like the biggest problem. How many of you have applied for a grant before? Show of hands, that's 1, 2, and okay, so not a lot of 3 people have applied for grants. So kind of all of it suffers from what I call the problem of only crying babies get fed. So if you cry very loudly, then you'll get a grant. And if you are someone who does not like to market or talk about your work, you don't get any money, basically. And this is true for Gitcoin rounds. It's true for all of our, like for grant applications. You have to do networking. You have to market your project. And only then do you actually get money. And like the reason for this is the second problem, which is quantity over quality. All of the judges have to go through many, many projects, and that's not fun for them to do. They have to go through 500 applications. So another very fun story, like Vitalik was told to like stop being a judge in ETH Global, because when he has to go through 30 projects, he could not do a good job of it. So he wants to just focus on 3 or 4 projects and do a very good job with them. So that's kind of the other problem deep funding is trying to solve. How can a judge just give like 5 reviews of a project, or like reviews of 5 projects, and somehow that influences the allocation to all of the projects? So that's kind of how we want to use AI. And the kind of all the projects should be rewarded. So not just those who apply for the round, or they come to know of it, or they know the director of the foundation. Everybody who's contributing should be able to get rewarded for the value that they provide. So this kind of is, in a brief, what deep funding, what we want. The biggest help that I need right now in terms of kind of my work at the EF over the next 2 months is just outreach to machine learning and AI people. because the challenge that we have open right now is to build an AI model which gives ranking to 15,000 edges in the Ethereum graph. So there are 5,000 open source repos. Some of them are used multiple places. And we need to know how important are each of these 5,000 repos. So we want to reach the AI community to take part in this challenge and build a model which tells us this. What do they have to do? So on one level, you have the level 1, which is 34 core repos. These are consensus, execution, and dev tooling clients. So we have to give a weight such that they add up to 1. A plus B plus C plus D should equal to 1. Then we have to figure out how much stays with the repo versus passed on to dependencies. So if I give an example of Brave browser, how many of you have heard of or used Brave browser? Okay, quite a few people, like 5, 6 people have worked on Brave. So Brave browser is actually not very original. The actual repo is called Chromium. Chromium is the open source repo, and Brave browser is a wrapper which we interact with. So if you're giving money, you want to give more money to Chromium and less money to Brave browser, because Chromium has done the bulk of the work. So that's what level 2 is, figuring out how much goes to the repo and how much goes to dependencies. And then the third level is just funding all of the dependencies. So Brave browser has Chromium, and it has many other dependencies. So figuring out which ones are more important. So this kind of is, I'll go into it deeper. So in the next slide, you can see it. This is like my favorite slide. This is the entire graph which makes Ethereum work. All of the different open source repos in Ethereum are represented over here. So there's about 10,000 edges in this graph. And if there's one takeaway that I want all of you to walk away with, it's that this is an unweighted graph. So there's no, all these lines are equal. And what we want AI people to do is tell us how thick these lines are. Like which lines are more important and which lines are less important. That's in a nutshell what deep funding is. It's an AI competition where you have to build a model which gives weights to this graph. This graph is not weighted. So that's kind of the, if there's nothing else you take away from this talk, like that's what I want you to kind of walk away with. We want AI submissions that give this weights. So let's assume that everybody in this room makes a submission in deep funding. So we'll have about maybe like 100 submissions. Everybody has submitted an AI model. So then the question becomes, how do we choose which AI gets selected? Which is the top AI? Which is the second best AI? So that's where we have like a judging mechanism with juries. So we have about 80 judges in deep funding who've totally made 600 comparisons. So on the right, you can see Barbell versus ESLint. And the judge has said that ESLint is 256 times more important than Barbell. So then the question becomes like, which AI model is best fitting the all of these judgments which judges make? So kind of, if I have to break it down easily, the judges give very few decisions because they have less time. So they give few decisions. AI model gives ratings on all of the repos, all 15,000 edges. Judges give for 500, AI gives for 15,000. But we use the 500 ratings of the judges to select the winning AI model. So which AI model is best fitting 500 ratings of the judges is kind of what deep funding is. So it's a really fun challenge. It's very meritocratic. If any of you think that you're good at AI, please take part in this challenge. There's $50,000 in prizes from Vitalik. So it's also the glory of kind of receiving money from Vitalik and contributing to Ethereum. So if any of you are into AI, like please submit and take part in this challenge. It's open for the next 2 months. This kind of is a representation of what the end output of deep funding is. This is just based on GitHub stars. So do not take these numbers seriously, but it gives an indication of how it would work. You put money into one public key, and this is actually the prompt which Vitalik gave, that is there a way to just have one public key? I put money in it, and it gets distributed to all of the different open source repos that make Ethereum work. Like he does not want to get into I'll give this much money to this project, that much to the other. That's not something kind of which is fun to do. So just give money into one public key and it gets distributed. So in this example, if you put $100, $15 goes to Remix project, $13 goes to Go Ethereum, $4 goes to Lodestar. So it's very simple to just put money and get it distributed to all of these different weights. This is a more concrete and a more fun example of what deep funding looks like the end output. So this looks at the ideological basis of Ethereum. This is kind of what Vitalik gave as an example of how deep funding would work. You have Ethereum in the center, and all of the influences of Ethereum. So Bitcoin's monetary policy is 19.5% responsible for Ethereum. Free and open source software is 20.5% responsible. So all of like Bitcoin is also not original. Bitcoin relies on Marx's labor theory of value. Bitcoin depends on Austrian economics. So Bitcoin has its own influences. So the second level is how much is Bitcoin originally responsible and how much are the dependencies responsible. So kind of if I have to show how this graph would work, I put $100 into this graph. $20 goes to Bitcoin's monetary policy, but that is only 1/3 responsible for Ethereum. 2/3 belongs to the dependencies. So only $7 out of $20 would go to Bitcoin's monetary policy. The remaining $13 goes to the dependencies. So labor theory of value or Marx gets 25 cents. Austrian economics is 1/3 responsible. So that gets about $4. So that's the way to interpret this graph. It's a way to fund all of the different kind of repos. And why is this important? I think this is kind of the concluding line I want you all to take away, is that corporates have always defeated open source networks because they integrate their profit centers with their cost centers. So if I take something like Twitter, or like Twitter has a profit center, which is the ad division, and it has a cost center, which is community notes. So the ad division does not get to control how much money goes to community notes. That we have a centralized system of CEOs, and the CEOs decide how much money each department gets. But in open source networks, we don't have that. The profit centers get to decide how much money goes to the cost centers, and because of that, we develop inferior products. So kind of what I really hope we can achieve with deep funding being the first example is better integration of the cost center with the profit center in open source networks. So assuming that all of you build an app and your app has 100 dependencies, you obviously want your dependencies to also grow with you. So you can create your own dependency graph, give weights to each dependency, and whatever revenue your app earns also goes to your dependencies to help them grow, and your product becomes better as a result. So if we really want to compete with corporates, we need to better integrate our profit centers and our cost centers. And this is kind of a step in that direction. These are some of the fun challenges. Like my main job at the EF is trying to figure out how we can get AI people interested in crypto and not just crypto people into AI, which is currently what we have. So this is like a really cool challenge that we just closed submissions for, where people have to build an AI model which predicts how much money 800 projects in Gitcoin round will get. So you build a model and it says, this project is going to get $500, this project will get $800, and once the round begins, we stop submissions, and then we see at the end of the round which model best predicted the results of the Gitcoin round. So it's a very fun and meritocratic challenge that you can build your own model, make predictions of which project gets how much money, and at the end we can see which model was actually the best at predicting it. And the cool part of this is, even if a project does not take part in a Gitcoin round, but we want to give them money, we can just see what did the top model, how much does it predict that the project would get if it had taken part. And then we can just give money to the project based on that. So projects don't need to shill, they don't need to market. They can just we can ask the top model, how much will this project get in a QF round? And we get an answer, and we know how much money to give a project. Because in general, humans are good at deciding which projects are good, but they are bad at deciding how much money a project should get. So we do badly in terms of quantity, but we do well in terms of is this good or bad. So that's kind of one of the problems that deep funding and these challenges solve by telling us how much money should a project get if we know for a fact that we want to fund them. This is a second challenge that we just finished up. We've started making the payouts to the winners, where we had a database of a lot of past funding rounds, and we asked participants to build AI models which predict how much money projects would get in those past funding rounds, which are already over. And they had a write-up, so you can actually go to the link at the bottom, and you can see some of the model submissions that were made. Interestingly, like the winning submission found that number of open issues is a very important indicator of how much funding a project gets. If you have open issues, it means you generally get more money. You can't obviously game this because no one knows which AI model is going to win. And that's kind of the really good part of all of these challenges, that if I am a project and I want to get maximum money, I don't know what metric to optimize for because I don't know which AI model will win the challenge. So it's kind of like an open challenge, and any AI model can win, and I don't know what the winning AI model is going to put as its parameters for how much funding a project should get. And yeah, this is like the last challenge, which is on right now. This challenge will be open for the next 2 months. We are closing submissions on June 10th. And this is 15,000, you have to give 15,000 weights. So it's a lot of weights. It's a very meaty challenge. And we ask that everyone here who's into AI, anyone who has connections with people who are machine learning builders, please get them to submit. Deep funding depends on good AI models being submitted. So this is kind of the main dependency that we have. And the main help that I can receive is basically getting more submissions in this contest. So this is all the partners that have made deep funding possible. Kind of something which has been really cool is how rather than Ethereum Foundation trying to build everything in-house and build it ourselves, which takes a lot of time, we've just worked with partners who've been working on this issue for many years. So Open Source Observer has been building GitHub dependencies and GitHub graphs for a long time, 1 or 2 years. Pairwise has been working on voting interfaces for about 2 years. Drips has been distributing money to open source repos. Pond is like a machine learning competition where you can take part in the deep funding challenge. So like our job at the EF is just trying to bring these different partners together so that the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. So kind of one of the philosophies of EF is subtraction. So we don't want to be building everything. The partners have done it. So that's the subtraction part. And the second philosophy, which I believe in, is synthesis, that how do we make the whole greater than the sum of the parts? So like a car, when you have tires and you have engine, the individual parts are not as good as the whole, which allows for locomotion or movement. So how do we actually make the whole greater than the sum of the parts in the infinite garden that we already have so many trees growing in the infinite garden? How do we get them to talk to each other and actually become more than each individual plant in the garden? And yeah, this is the last slide. This is the QR code to join our Telegram group. So please join, please submit models. If you have an idea of the dependencies in Ethereum, and if you're a core developer, become a judge. So the main 2 ways that we need help, one way is reaching out to AI communities and getting them to submit models. And the second way is being a judge and doing comparisons of the repos to select the winning AI model. So that's kind of the larger point. And yeah, before I conclude, I'll just like talk a little bit about funding mechanisms and what we need and what we want in public goods. So kind of one of the problems with a lot of the funding mechanisms is I decide how much money to give you. So and that affects our relationship. If I give you less money next time, you'll be like, hey, Devansh, why did you give me less money? And then our relation gets affected. So we need to create a level of indirection where I indirectly select an AI model, and the AI model decides how much money to give you so that our relation remains unaffected. So how do we create that level of indirection? And the second challenge is how do we make sure that we don't suffer from projects which divide themselves into multiple sub-projects, get more money than if they were kept as one project. So we've seen this in Gitcoin rounds, we've seen this in Optimism, where if you have one big project, you get less money. But if you divide that big project into smaller projects, you get more money. So that's kind of another big problem that we need to solve. So this is just some prompts for all of you. I hope I was understandable. And please join the Telegram group and help us make this challenge a success. Thanks.
Thank you, Devansh, for the electrifying insight. Please be seated. Thank you, everyone. I believe all of you have a more profound understanding of the mechanism, governance, and philosophy of the Ethereum foundations, especially on the funding allocation. Thank you, Devansh, for helping us conclude the chapter 1 about the presence of Ethereum. Now we are moving to our chapter 2, strengthening the ecosystem through collaboration. Like we mentioned a few times, today is a reunion of different communities. So we are very honored to have speakers from different countries. Please join me in giving a very welcome to our moderator today, Bruce Xu, co-initiator of ETH Panda, who will be moderating the panel. Second panelist is QZ, Ethereum Singapore. Queen, ETH Vietnam. Also, Delane Fo, Regional Manager Director of APAC of Ethereum. The topic of today's panel is Asian Communities in Motion, Growth, Challenges, and Connections. Bruce, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hey guys, hello everyone. Welcome to our panel today, Asian Community in Motion, Growth, Challenges, and Connections. So I'm Bruce from East Panda. So I'm more than happy to have you all here today. So let's talk about some topics related to the our 3 key main topics. So from growth, the challenge, and the connection. So I think maybe let's start with a quick self-introduction. Yeah. So
thanks, Bruce. Hi, I'm QZ. I helped put together Ethereum Singapore, and this year we're working on an Ethereum ecosystem fund.
Very short. Hi everyone, my name is Queen, founder of Suchi Blockchain Hub and ETH Vietnam. So we're building the Web3 ecosystem in Vietnam and the region.
Hi, I'm Delane. You can call me Del. I'm from Nethermind and I look after the APAC region for the company. We are one of the largest, I guess you can say, companies in the space where we do blockchain engineering, research, and security, and have worked with most of the, if not many of the projects in the space. Thanks.
okay, cool. So let's jump into the conversation. So the question is regarding growth. So therefore, my first question is, what's the current state of your community? And what if we want to make it, scale it to tenfold? What will you do? Or any idea of it? Yeah. Start from you.
I'll start. Well, that's a very tough question, right? So in Singapore, I think we are a very globalized nation, especially with a lot of the recent conversations about globalization. Singapore plays an interesting role, especially in Ethereum. A lot of organizations and companies are actually domiciled in Singapore. And so the Ethereum ecosystem has kind of grown on its own because of very favorable policies, or just that maybe we've been doing Ethereum events, Ethereum activities for maybe 9 to 10 years already. So for us, I think to 10x such an ecosystem, it's not the role of any one person or organization. It requires the right kind of culture. And I think for us, in order for us to be able to make this happen, we need to ensure that Ethereum still stays open, friendly, and relevant. And I think that's the only way that we can 10x the ecosystem that we have. And Singapore is really just a microcosm of the overall Ethereum ecosystem. For us, it changes with the times. Now I think a lot of people are very interested in AI. But the talent and the sources of interesting projects are still coming from centers of learning and places where there is a thriving startup ecosystem. So for us, at least from a Singaporean perspective, I think we welcome you to come and join us and work together in like a really small country, I suppose, where we can always stay very tightly knit. And hopefully, you know, that's one way that we can help grow what we do.
Cool.
About the stage of like East Vietnam, I just like look at like around like friends from China here, friends from Singapore, from Hong Kong, and I see that actually the Vietnam is still the like emerging market. However, like for Vietnam, we also have a lot of like talent there, especially for developers, and also like for the user for blockchain and also for crypto, it like grows super fast. So for the community also like play the critical role in the region, especially in terms of like the pools of talents and the numbers of the new projects. So let's say about Ethereum ecosystem or community, what is the status there? So we have so many developers building on Ethereum ecosystem, and we also have the numbers of good projects building from there. Right now, like in Vietnam, we have more than 400,000 of developers in Vietnam, and then Ethereum definitely is one of the biggest change that most of the project also build on, besides another change. And how to also leverage this to 10x? This is a question that we also ask ourselves a lot among the community. So I think that like there are several key things that we need to care about. Number one is like education and leverage the skills for the community. So we need to do a lot of education workshop, and for East Vietnam, we focus for the developer community. So for this, we also work from the grassroots, like from student, from community, from we working with the government, also like to do more education program to boost for this among the country. And the second part that we also care about is like how to build the ecosystem, not only for the community, but also for the early stage project that they can build, and also they can have more support. So this is also regarding to more like global resources, more good mentors, not only on the tech side, but also on the business side. And also, we also see like what is the regulation that really support for the tech startup and also for the builders building on this. So right now, the good things about Vietnam is like the new Vietnam government also really put like AI and blockchain is one of the key direction and also like changing. And they also like will launch the very new regulation soon to welcome more tech talent, also more project, more investment into Vietnam, and also like support for blockchain. So that is a thing that also really boosts for the ecosystem. The third thing that we think about is also like, how really to have for the others protocol and foundation also like enter the market, and also like, bring more values into the market. So that is a key thing that with that way, we also can boost for all the values, and also like can leverage for the community, and also have more contribution by the community, not only by one or like two organizations. So that way is like can boost way much faster.
Okay.
But I will let more for Delane to share about on your side. Yeah.
Yes, so I think never mind in this panel, we're not a community, so I'll talk about it from the perspective of a company, right? So Nethermind is, by head count globally, we're about 300 over people. And in Asia alone, right now, we are now 90 people in Asia, of which almost 50% of the people in our Asian team were added in the last year. So we've been growing very fast in the region. And when we talk about that idea of like how you 10x, I think our goal wasn't really to 10x as like the guiding principle, but it's really to create an environment where in the company we are able to provide global quality projects for people that are working in Asia, right? So it's a combination of two things: finding customers in the region, but also engaging the communities, hiring really top talent and attracting them to the company, right? So and we talk about a broader ecosystem approach. Like part of it is, yes, we are talking about engineering and product talent, and they are attracted by like the big, hairy, audacious goals, the most fun, exciting challenges. And I think Nethermind has done a good job to kind of be that platform for them to come in to work on those projects. Not many of you may know, but Nethermind has a long-running internship program where it's been running for the last couple of years, and it's unique in that these interns they come in. They're not just from the Web3 native industry, but a lot of the people that come into Nethermind from this program are people from outside of the industry. So they are like PhDs working on like really hard problems, and they're looking for a place to apply what they're researching. Right, and that's where Nethermind provides that platform. We are working on existing active problems, and we are able to give a platform to these really smart people to come and work on these problems. And after that, they pass through Nethermind, and they become alumni. So Nethermind now has an alumni network of over 600 people that have passed through or were once part of Nethermind, and I think we're very proud of that program. Yeah, so I think that's one way we'll be continuing to contribute to this bigger 10x.
Yeah, very cool. So for East Panda, so Panda refers Chinese. So we are made up of Chinese developer and builders, Ethereum. So we united together to build better, support Ethereum. So in our community, I think we have we formed last year, so we already have 1,700 members, so with over 200 members really active. So I think speaking about the scale tenfold, I think one key point in my mind is to research and build up very big or many big projects or some applications. So therefore, we can create a lot of jobs. Then draw people into the learn something like a necessary tech or something like that. At the same time, we can provide educational content or hackathon or something like that. Otherwise, because without opportunities, even though there are many people, developer, students learning something, but they struggle to find somewhere to build. So I think that's if I can only choose one thing, that's very important for me. So, yeah. And speaking about, because we both have community and developers, so I would like to ask a quick question about the notable projects in your community and some highlights, regional highlights. So, yeah, maybe from Singapore. Yeah.
For Singapore?
Yeah.
I guess the more recent ones that are somewhat relevant that I've been hearing from a lot of conversations here is that Singapore has a strong banking sector that is actually somewhat interested in building in Web3. So like Deutsche Bank, they were launching an L2. That's from some of the efforts that the Singapore government has put forth since 2018, I think, with this project called Project Ubin, where they were looking at launching stable coins. And it's interesting because from a very pragmatic perspective, such a project is one of the best use cases for Ethereum, but it's also very poignant in the sense that it's really strange because a lot of us joined the ecosystem for decentralization. So I like to highlight this project maybe to show the tensions that we are going to be facing as an ecosystem moving forward.
Cool. How about Vietnam?
For Vietnam, actually, we really strong for the last cycle. I think that for gaming, a lot of GameFi projects building since 2017, 18, 20. And also a lot of projects strong on DeFi also. So nowadays also more AI agent mixing with blockchain also growing very, very fast in Vietnam. And another thing that because of the new regulation is coming, so also one of the key hot topic is about the exchange in Vietnam. Domestically open in Vietnam, and also a lot of big enterprises, and also banking also jump into this for the adoption of blockchain. So for banking and finance also it is growing very fast on this. Yeah, so that is the current stage of Vietnam. Yeah.
Okay, so any new features or plans from Netherlands, Dale? Yeah.
In the APAC region?
Yeah.
Well, and in particular the use cases in APAC, right? Or Well, I think I can respond to what both QZ and Quinn were saying. I think primarily because Nethermind is involved in not just the Web3 native businesses, as in having them as partners and clients, but we also work with enterprises and financial institutions too. It's just the way that we've grown as a company to then partner up, in many modes of collaboration, and we just found ourselves in this kind of nice sweet spot where we are able to contribute to different sides of the conversation. Yeah, we're very excited about potentially working with more enterprises and financial institutions. I think, that's something that Nethermind has a lot of strength in, working within the Web3 industry with all the protocols, with all the projects. And I think we've built the reps, right? Built the reps of knowing what it takes to build in the ecosystem. And now we are bringing that expertise to the enterprises and the financial institutions. We're seeing a lot of conversations around public permission blockchain. So what does that mean, right? Is the enterprises trying to get onto Ethereum, trying to build an Ethereum, but they have certain bespoke needs, right? They want certain, they have certain privacy needs, or they need to protect their end customers, and that is that point of friction. There is also a point of opportunity for a company like Nethermind to come in and help move the needle. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So speaking about the notable highlights in East Panda, like in Chinese communities, I would say the region and DGen is quite separate. So two groups of people, right? So speaking about the region part, I can see there are a lot of layer 2 projects and ZK related things, because I can see there are many layer 2 project founder has a Chinese background. And when I was in Invisible Garden, which is a ZK hacker house last year, so I can see about over half of them are Chinese. So yeah, that's for region part. And for DGen part is I would say is actively in some meme coin projects recently, right? I can also see some hardware wallets, PayFi or dApps, coming. Show up, yeah, recently. And I think even though we have so many notable highlights, I think we still have a lot of challenges facing, like in development of each community. So with those challenges, we can do much better after we overcome those challenges, right? So what do you think, like QZ, some challenges you are facing with?
Right. In Ethereum specifically, I suppose.
You can say.
Like, it's not easy. Ethereum is, I think, maybe one of the most misunderstood ecosystems, like from every angle. People think that like Ethereum is too philosophical, maybe, or it overly trades off on decentralization. But if you listen to Xiaowei's talk earlier, it's actually the core of what makes Ethereum the way it is, but it's very hard to kind of convince verbally, right? Like, it's hard to talk about resilience unless something happens. Because if not, you sound like you are over-preparing for something that might never happen. So as an example, right, like when like the pandemic happened, Singapore has actually been preparing for something like this since the SARS pandemic in 2004. So we were somewhat prepared, or at least we were more prepared than most countries. These are things that, like in Ethereum, you will not appreciate until like your chain breaks down. And for us, I think maybe it'll get a little bit easier as the years go by, where the value of a truly decentralized platform will be even more apparent as more and more people in your own countries seek neutral places for you to grow or to just run your own business or do your own things. So I think hopefully that challenge will be a bit easier. But till then, I hope more folks help us share the message and take the time to really experience it for yourself. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, Queen? Yeah.
for me, I think a lot of challenges for building the ecosystem and the community. But one of the thing is like, for example, Ethereum really want to build a long-lasting infrastructure and products, even can last for hundreds years, right? And then for a lot of builders, you know, like they don't have that kind of long-term vision. So they even like this, because a lot of degen in the ecosystem also, right? They also follow the trend. And also like, you know, they think about how to monetizing it as quick as possible. So that is one of the things that I think that is not really aligned with the Ethereum values, and how we also can support and, you know, spread out the philosophy of Ethereum, and also like helping the founders to have the longer term vision to really like build the good quality projects, and even like solve the real world problems and bring it to back to our real life, and, you know, create the impacts in our own community, our own economy, and our own country, or even like spread it out to the region. That is one of the key thing, and it takes a long time. But I always like, you know, I kind of optimistic, maybe idealist person. I believe in the good thing. And I believe that, you know, the more people and the more activity that we keep talking about it, and also like we working on the different levels, even with the government, with the different like, you know, community in the region, we can collaborate, or with other like, you know, builders, we can spread out about the spirit, about the philosophy, and also the real world use case that really successful happening in other countries, and bring back to Vietnam. So that is also like bring more use cases, and also the role models for the builders and also the founders in Vietnam to, you know, to learn from it. And then I believe that with the good quality of the builders in Vietnam, they can build very fast and great products also. And with the current like, you know, market with 20 million crypto user, with all of that can scale super, super fast. So it's just like, you know, it will get there. It just takes a bit more time, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And for Dell, because we both know that Nethermind is a global company, so I'm curious, like from your perspective, what's the difference between like APAC and US or Europe or other regions in terms of challenges?
Well, I think, you know, like both QZ and Quinn, and, you know, yourself too, Bruce, you're familiar with, I think the view of the West towards APAC is that we often talk about it as like one block, and everything is applicable across the board, but it's not. It's like a collection of, you know, countries. It's like fractionalized. There's a hot pot of cultures, and the way things are being implemented is completely different, right? Even within the member states or member countries within the Asia-Pacific, Asia region, how we apply policy and regulation is different, right? Some countries are more US-leaning, some countries are more, you know, China-leaning in terms of the way that they view themselves in relationship to in the world, and that creates this interesting chaos, right? And how we then approach APAC is really a little bit of a combination of being very conscious of what our value is, like what we bring to the table, and then looking for the right partners in a very opportunistic way, right? And of course, the window opportunity is always, you know, it's just there, and it can close very quickly. So we have to act fast, right? We have to be opportunistic and also be considerate about how we engage. I think we are also in a process where, you know, if you're a gamer and you look at it, it's like a fog of war map, right? Where, you know, something will open up when you step in one direction, and at some point you'll find your way towards the other side, right? But you have to have a North Star. So we have a few North Stars that we are trying to pursue in the region, and then the way there is really just being very adaptive and watching the macros, like see what's happening in the market. Yeah. Yeah, so it's different in Europe and US in that way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing. And speaking about East Panda in Chinese communities, I think there are two main challenges. One is the language. So, you know, members are struggle with English. And so therefore, but that's easy to solve because we can translate. We always translate something. And also we send students like to here. So this time we sponsored like East Asia sponsored over around 20 students to here to join the events. The second one, yeah, I totally agree with you guys. So the second one is policy, because it's a very strict laws in China to, regards cryptocurrencies. So if we do some events or activities in mainland China, we have to be very tech focused. We can't, mention a lot of others. So and some global projects, avoid working with us due to like compliance risks. So that's a very important, very big challenge. But I think that Hong Kong is good to open and try to test in new policies. So that's let's see. So if there's something happen. So the I think the last question is gonna be quick and basically we have analyzed the challenges and what do you think like how to contribute in the next 3 to 5 years to make your community better. So would you like to share some future plans? Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Ethereum Singapore, and if you have time, I'm doing a short talk about it later at 2:30, but Ethereum Singapore has transformed over the last 7 years of our existence. It started out as just meetups. Like we all started as meetups, right? Like you rent a room and then you just like talk about Ethereum, you teach Solidity. Back then it was like, when I first did it, it was like version 0.4 or something. Yeah. But it has completely changed. The entire industry, or at least maybe the entire ecosystem has become an industry. And I think that requires an entirely different kind of playbook. For Ethereum Singapore, for us, we are very thankful and privileged that the Ethereum name and the brand and its leadership, it's very strongly associated with quality and with doing meaningful things. Like Ethereum Foundation has been like the bulwark or hallmark of like what a steward of a decentralized ecosystem can be, and it's given us like a lot of opportunities for opening doors with people curious about Web3 in general. Like everybody learns about Bitcoin. It's kind of like the biggest meme or concept that everybody interacts with. But Ethereum is like an entirely different intellectual chasm that you have to cross in order for you to really appreciate what it can do for you. For us, we hope to increase our emphasis on usability. And if we can help more people cross the next chasm, which is the usability chasm, then I think it would really help. And I think this is the one thing that will get us through the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, cool. Thank you. How about?
For us, like we keep doing whatever we're doing now. Nothing special. Focus on education. So that's number one thing. So we will also like multiply like all like numbers of workshop for students, for developers. For last maybe like 3 years, we have done more than 300, 400 workshops already. So it means that every week like we have something happening, some workshop for student or developer at all different levels. But now we also like increase that numbers of workshop even for enterprises, because like for the government also have the direction to adopt blockchain, and that's what we're also doing. That's number one. And second, that we also keep doing like a lot of hackathon. The good thing about Vietnam is like we have so many developers, and also the students, they also love to build. So whenever we do hackathon, even like small scale, we also have number of the good projects from there. So for example, like even we do like AI blockchain hackathon, the mini one, we also can easily have like 10 to 20 new projects already from there. And also like for the events thing, we keep doing Eat Vietnam. So for the next Eat Vietnam, also like in next month. So for that, we also have the conference and also 3-day hackathon. So through those kind of activity, we also bring more like numbers of projects and ideas into the ecosystem. And the last thing that we focus for now is the incubation program, because we believe that from the idea from the hackathon is just the very start. And in order to support them to become like more sustainable project, we even like need to do like way much more. So the incubation program is one of the things that we focus for now, that we can support them like during the early stage, like after MVP product like building, also like how to help them to even like grow community, bring it to the global scale, or even raising fund so they can be more sustainable. And from that, we even can use those projects and bring it back to the different industries in Vietnam, and also like collaborate with other enterprises to solve some real world problem. And that's the thing that we do, yeah.
Okay, cool. So there.
So I think for Nethermind, we exist in firstly a very unique industry, right? And Nethermind as a company is also maturing as the ecosystem itself matures. So we are growing together, right? And I think for us, it will remain the same, where we will constantly take leadership and signals from Ethereum and the broader Ethereum EVM ecosystem, and we calibrate from there. But what we will continue to do is that we lead from where we are within our locus of control, right? And that is, we are by DNA a team of like very strong engineering and product people, and then even our operations people are also kind of technically inclined, right? And just make sure that we are maintaining the kind of culture in symbiosis to Ethereum, but constantly work on enhancing and strengthening our engineering and product capabilities so that we can show not just within Ethereum, but outside of Ethereum, the conviction that we have, right? That why we want to stay, right? So people can be attracted to, want to work with high quality people, right? So keep a high quality team in the ecosystem and continue to contribute, what we learn and what we're pushing the edge of with the broader ecosystem. Yeah, so that would be how we look at things.
Okay, yeah, cool. So I think we have finished the questions. So if you want to get more information about local communities or build collaborations, welcome to join the East Asia booth. So we have a booth there, so feel free to reach out. And I want to say thank you to all of you guys and for joining this discussion. So enjoy your wonderful day in East Asia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of the speakers flying over to Hong Kong to attend this incredible regional flagship event. Thank you so much. And I agree with them. Community is the foundation, potential, and the future of the ecosystem. After this dynamic session, we have just finished a part of chapter 2. In the afternoon, we will have other keynote and panel discussions. Don't miss out. After the lunch break, we will reconvene at 2 p.m. for the second panel, focused on interoperability. But first, enjoy lunch and the networking outside. Thank you, everyone. See you later. I hope all of you had a very refreshing lunch break and some nice networking out there. Let's continue today's ETH Asia, and we are very thrilled to reunite Ethereum communities across Asia and beyond, all united by a shared vision to make Ethereum Asia great again. Let's quickly recap this morning's highlights. We heard the opening remark from Mr. Du Yu, Executive Director of Wanxiang Blockchain and General Manager of Wanxiang Blockchain Labs. Also, a keynote speech from the co-founder of Ethereum, Vitalik, talk about the future of Ethereum Layer 1. Also, two different keynotes from Ethereum Foundation, Xiaowei and Devansh, cover governance, funding mechanism, and other visions and outlooks for the future. Now, we are diving into the second panel of the Chapter 2 about strengthening the ecosystem through collaboration. This panel, titled, How Can Layer 2 Work Together to Strengthen Ethereum? Please join me in welcoming our incredible panelists. YQ Jia, who will be moderating today's panel, co-founder of Altlayer. Again, Vitalik Buterin, co-founder of Ethereum. Ed Filton, co-founder of Off-Chain Labs. And final panelist is Ali Ben Sesson, CEO of Starkware. We can now to hear your vision. Welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon. So it is super exciting, basically to have all the panelists with us to discuss about these L2s and also interoperability in general. As normal, right? Probably we just do a quick self-introduction. I start from Vitalik. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Vitalik. I'm co-founder of the Ethereum project.
I'm Ed Felton. I'm co-founder and chief scientist at Off-Chain Labs, the original developers of Arbitrum.
Eli Ben Sasson, co-founder and CEO of Starkware.
Yeah, so YQ here, founder of Altlayer. We are basically providing the rollup services for all different stacks. Okay, since, as you can see from the topic of this panel, right? So we want to discuss about this either future for the Ethereum and also for the L2s. And first, we all know that for the past few years, we already made so many big progress for the rollups, especially the rollup-centric roadmap. But at the same time, people complaining about these fragmentations across the different rollups, right? So then the first question I will like to ask. So right now, either on Vitalik's side, Ethereum Foundation side, or on different L2s, right? So what are the sort of solutions you have, basically to mitigate this kind of fragmentation, and what are the new ways we basically can have to address this problem in general?
Yeah, so I think for the 80-20 of cross L2 fragmentation for me is a lot of it is UX, and a lot of it can also be simplified down to just the difficulty of moving tokens between L2s and between an L2 and L1. And this is one particular action, and that's a really big piece of what people actually want, right? And so we can figure out specific solutions for a lot of those specific problems, right? So for example, we've been working a lot on the open intents framework and making cross-chain asset transfers, including ETH, including ERC20s through intents, so meaning through basically liquidity providers fronting the money for you as a way of making transfers be instant. Also chain-specific addresses as one of these abstractions to make it feel more natural on the user side. We think a send should feel or a cross L2 bridge should feel exactly the same as a send. And with chain-specific addresses, we can do that. And then after that, there's a series of different things that can be done further, right? So we talked about L2 is being able to read L1 directly. We can talk about reducing the L2 finalization time. There's a whole series of different things that can be done to try to reduce those frictions further, right? And I mean, and then in the longer term, you know, you get into like synchronous composability, you get into other kind of more complicated things, right? But I think for me, the important thing is that we start with things that we already know how to do and that can increase the user experience and reduce the complexity of navigating the cross L2 environments right now. And there's lots of those that exist that are being worked on, and then keep improving them over time.
Yeah, so I think, you know, as Vitalik suggested, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here around things like standardization. And that work is well underway with a lot of different teams participating. And so we can at least eliminate the unnecessary friction in how these things work. So there are standard ways that, say, a wallet can express what it is that a user is trying to do across different chains, and different stacks. In the longer run, I think user experience is key to this because in many respects it is fundamentally a UX problem. But I think we're not going to solve it just with user interfaces. It's going to take careful thinking through the whole stack, from user interface all the way down to core protocol, to try to figure out what are the affordances that need to be done at each layer in order to provide that user experience. It's really, I know, a big topic of research all across the Ethereum community. It certainly is for our team. And I'm really excited, actually, about some of the things that are in the pipeline. I think we're going to make progress on this faster than you might expect.
I don't have much to add. The technology that you know, we bring to table, and I think can really help, you know, moving between different chains or between L1 and L2, is that of validity proofs, in particular Starks. So the more you can prove cryptographically that something happened in a different part of the universe cryptographically, the easier it becomes to you know, use and move assets or know that something really happened there. So we already, a team building on Starknet already has storage proofs for Ethereum. The team is called Herodotus. And I think these kinds of things can be extended. So it's, of course, doesn't solve the whole problem, and you need standardization and a lot of efforts on improving UX. But the one thing that I think can really help that we can bring to the table is that of proving cryptographically that something happened in a different corner of the universe.
A quick follow-up question. Like recently, I think initiated by Ethereum Foundation, we have this open intern program, right? So Vitalik, can you share a little bit more on this sort of vision or open intent, and at the same time how, like, for example, Arbitrum and Starware, like, you basically contribute to this program?
Yeah, so the way that this works is, right, imagine I have 1 ETH on Optimism, and I'm trying to move the 1 ETH to Arbitrum, right? Then the problem is, if you do it natively, you have to wait 1 week, right? Because you have to wait for the Optimism withdrawal period, and in the other direction, it's basically the same too, right? And so what you do is, on the Optimism side, you put you move the 1 ETH into a smart contract. And then the rules of that smart contract say, whoever proves that they sent to me the 1 ETH on the other end, on the Arbitrum end, they will be able to get that 1 ETH from the Optimism side, right? And so from my perspective as a sender, like, I first send a transaction, I send my coin and Optimism into this lockbox, and then immediately after, someone claims it. Like, there's going to be a race to claim it first, and it's done through a smart contract to prevent like double claiming. And then what I see is, like, I feel like I just see those coins appearing, and possibly even at the same time some action immediately happening on the Arbitrum side, right? And then you have a liquidity provider that's like waiting for that 1 week on my behalf, right? And so it's a pretty standard technique, pretty easy to understand. And things like across protocol, we're doing it from a user's perspective, especially for small value transfers. It's extremely fast. Like, you get like 2 to 5 seconds is very normal. And but one of the important things, I think, is that things like this need to be open, right? So things like, basically, one of the tests that I use to like basically evaluate, like whether or not we're like going in the right direction is like I think every property that Ethereum L1 had back in 2015 should be, as much as possible, a property that the cross L2 ecosystem should have in 2025, right? And so you as a user should be able to move your coins from one place to another place without trusting single centralized parties, right? And so you as a user, you should not be aware like who's even filling your intent, right? It should be done with an open protocol. Any solver should be able to come in, freely participate. It's an open market system. And like this is the sort of stuff that the open intents framework is standardizing.
How's the progress on Arbitrum side?
Sure. I love the open intent framework. It's a big part of our plans to build out interop at Off-Chain Labs. The Arbitrum community is bought into this and really focusing not on do we do open intent framework because that is because that seems like a no-brainer. But instead, what is the best way to do it? How can you make the settlement of the intents as trustless and fast and cheap as possible?
Yeah, we want to support it. We have a different virtual machine and programming language, so it makes it a bit more difficult to integrate with, but of course we would like to be a part of it, and I hope we can get there as quickly as possible.
Actually, just one immediate question there. Would it not be possible to support it by using the open intents framework as is with Kakarot and then doing some kind of Starknet in like native thing to move things to other places in Starknet land?
So in theory, practice and theory are the same. Like, yes, in theory you can do it easily and immediately. In practice, it's getting it to the wallets and integrated and getting Kakarot to do. So Kakarot is a ZK EVM on top of Starknet that is basically proofed with Stark proofs. So it's sort of halfway between Starknet and Ethereum or a ZK VM. But yes, theoretically this is very easy. Practically requires a bit effort.
Yeah, so my next question will be like, we all know that for the past few years, right? I mean, we all like sort of witnessed this DeFi summer, the boom of all the different DeFi applications. We saw the surge of these super high gas fee, like over 500 GE, right? And then later, Vitalik proposed this like roll-up-centric roadmap to really address like the scalability issue. And so far, I believe with all the efforts from the panelists, we really achieve like right now we can easily achieve like tons of thousand TPS at the roll-up level, right? But right now I can see that from Vitalik talks and Ed and Ali talks, right? We are still trying to figure out new ways to either improve the scalability and also the security, decentralization, and basically all different features for roll-up. And then my next question will be, so what are the ways like as Ethereum as L1 can help this L2? We discussed a bunch of times, right? Like, do you think we should make Ethereum much faster and cheaper to make it better to support like sort of the L2s? And on the other side, I also have the question for Ed and Ali. So what are the other ways L2s can further support the L1 like Ethereum?
So from the L1 side, I think two things. So one is we've made it our top priority to increase blob count in 2025. So full speed ahead on PeerDAS, and the goal is to massively increase the number of blobs that Ethereum can support this year, and then massively increase that number again next year. So like we feel that L2s should not have to like make constantly worry about where they're going to be putting their data. There should just be enough data space for everyone, and like we think that there can be, right? So that's one. And then two is, I mean, from the like L2 security perspective, I mean, I think there's things that can be done. Like one of the big primary goals, right, I think is continuing to improve the security of the proof systems. And there's two different ways to approach that. I think one is that there's a lot of like shared objectives between L1 and L2 in terms of improving the safety of ZK EVMs, for example. And the other approach is this like native rollup precompile approach, which basically says the EVM already has an EVM verification functionality because it has to for Ethereum, and so let's expose that functionality and let's make it available to be called directly by L2s. And like if it's done in the right way, right, then like it can be done in a way that's very modular, right? So like where an L2 that has the EVM and something else, they would be able to use the native precompile for the EVM parts, and then they would have to bring their own logic for the other parts. But the benefit of this would be like you basically would get to greatly simplify the size of the code base that an L2 needs to have.
Got it.
Sure. If I may, let me talk about L1 issues and then talk about what L2s can do. So first of all, you know, as an L2 developer, growth in blob space is super welcome. Blob space is L2 block space. And you know, despite some of the chatter we hear that maybe Ethereum has too much capacity now and we should reduce it in order to get more revenue, you know, I think it's the right approach to try to scale as far as you can, as fast as you can. And that's great to see. There's amazing work going on there. There's a couple other areas of work going on in the L1 space that our team and others are contributing to that I think will help L2s a lot. One of them is to reduce the censorship exposure through mechanisms like Fossil on L1, because for many rollup protocols, the concern about censorship of L1 Ethereum drives some of the design. And another one is faster finality on L1, because L2 finality comes at essentially the speed of L1 finality for well-designed protocols. Again, those problems are both extremely hard, otherwise Ethereum would have solved them already. But there's useful and interesting work going on in that space. But let me pivot to the question you posed to me, which is what can L2s do to help L1? And I think a big part of it is to contribute actively to working on problems like those, right? To contribute to the development of L1. Our team, for example, are the developers of Prism, which is one of the leading consensus clients for Ethereum. And that not only helps us contribute to Ethereum in a significant way, but also helps us to better understand the interplay between L1 and L2 protocol layers. So I think that's a big part of it. Really being active participants in making L1 better as opposed to simply sitting back and leaving all that work to the L1 community.
How about Ali?
Yeah, I think a lot about L1s and L2s is about community and mindshare. And I think on our part, we're very proud of our affiliation with Ethereum. And I think like, you know, directing mindshare and resources and thinking time into also how to, let's say, make things easier to operate on Starknet on the side of Ethereum would be very much welcome. What we can offer on our side and offering everyone, you know, Ethereum, we're offering it to Bitcoin, we're offering it to client-side proving, is the best proving technology out there. And we'd love to, of course, I think it could do a lot also to help scale Ethereum on the layer 1 level, you know, things like proving the EVM itself. So I'm referring mostly to our 2 proving systems, Stone, which is already in production for 5 years, and Stu, which is going into production in a month. Both of them are open sourced, and I think they can also really reshape what can be achievable in terms of throughput, scale, UX on both L2s and L1s.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with like sort of Ed and also Ali, Vitaly on that. We should really figure out like ways, like not just like Ethereum should really help on all the rollups and L2s and to basically have better standards, but at the same time it would be great like we can unite as like sort of one ecosystem to really make it like more popular with more developers. And then I have this kind of very specific question collected from the community. And so we all know, right now, if you look at the market, I mean, we all know that it's not good, and it's really because of tariff, right? And then the question, some community members are saying that, is it possible Ethereum can also charge some tariff on the L2s? It can be like sort of ask L2s to like sort of stake their earned revenues, or basically use their earned revenues to buy back probably more Ether, something like that. Just to like it's a various ways, right? I really want to know like what's your thoughts on this? Even sometimes probably it's not like that kind of serious, but I just feel like it's a very sort of interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, I mean, obviously L2s, I mean, like already pay some fees to L1 in the form of, I mean, like both proof submission and DA. And I mean, to me, one of the challenges that I've noticed historically is like those two, like the level of fee often ends up swinging pretty wildly, right? And so for the past year, the narrative has been that like, you know, the L2s are exploiting L1 and they're like not giving anything back. But then 2 years ago, remember the narrative is like the big bad L1 is charging the L2s very high rent, and the L2s will, you know, bravely declare independence and like maybe join Solana or something, right? And basically, you know, the problem is like when, you know, like you have these like two different markets that just like swing in different directions, right? And it's like we don't really have much long-term certainty over like whether the fee accrual on both sides is like even going to be like like basically the ideal outcome, right, I think, is for fee accrual on both sides to be reliably like very, very far from zero, and ideally to be aligned with each other. I think, I mean, on the blob count side, like one thing that I support is like there's an EIP to just increase the minimum blob fee, and like I think it's reasonable, and like I think we should just do it. And to me, the reason is that like that blob fee, like that minimum is already like somewhat lower than the I think just average that we've seen over the past year, but generally like it basically means that you remove the misalignment of incentives, right? Because currently, like if you basically like the way to get increase the total blob fees is to shrink the blob count, and that's like a very bad perverse incentive. But like if there's just like a flat minimum fee, then like that pushes everyone toward the only strategy, which is to maximize revenue for L1 and at the same time space for L2s by everyone working together to increase the blob count as much as possible. So like in general, as far as the economics goes, like I'm in favor of like finding more of these things to just make sure incentives are aligned by default as much as possible, and I think that can like help make things even more cooperative.
Yeah, I think incentive alignment really comes from each chain setting a minimum fee. I think a minimum blob data fee makes a lot of sense, and the proposals out there I think are in the right range. Setting minimum fees so that the chains are not operating at a deficit, where say at the minimum blob fee right now, certainly it costs the Ethereum validator community more to service those blobs than the revenue that's coming in. And you don't want to be there, right? So you start a baseline at cost, but then above that, it's supply and demand, right? And if you're scaling, if you're creating more blob space, more block space, then prices will stay low. It's a fundamental trade-off in pricing these systems. You can price for short-term revenue by contracting the supply, or you can go for growth by expanding the supply, and in the belief that over the long term, bringing more people in, growing that community is going to lead to creating a robust economic zone, and that the revenue will be there over time. But it is a fundamental trade-off. If you optimize for short-term revenue, I think you end up cutting yourself off from growth and ultimately losing to other L1s. And the same is true for L2s.
Yeah. How about
I do think considering things like tariffs or the sustainable economics of a chain and its ecosystem operators, validators, developers, app chain, application developers, core developers, is something that should be taken into consideration. And I think that in that context, actually tariffs or setting minimum prices or things like that does make a lot of sense. I can share that. Well, right now the costs of fees are so low that across certainly our L2, but others as well. But back in the day when fees were a bit higher because Ethereum was congested, so we took like most of the revenue that came in and distributed to the developers of end user applications, and it's something that we're committed to do again once there's any significant income coming from fees. I think that sort of makes sense. In general, yeah, so I think this is all with thought about the broadness of the ecosystem and encouraging and ensuring that newcomers, if they offer value to the network, they should be rewarded automatically through the protocol. So I do think things like minimum fees, tariffs, oops, my otter fell, should be considered.
Yeah, so one thing I really agree with, I sort of add is that we probably need to recalculate this kind of resource allocation and also previous some metrics calculation like you previously presented in the keynote. And it's no longer just for Arbitrum. Probably we should consider Ethereum plus all the rollup as a whole, like really the entire like sort of token economics and all the cost for validators, and sometimes also about these earnings from the applications and the users. Yeah, we should probably really figure out like a better analysis for this model.
If I may, I want to emphasize something. When I think the biggest threat to any blockchain or to any system is that of is the problem of forces of centralization on all levels. And the biggest challenge is for all of blockchain is how do we broaden the basis even more on every level of the operators, of the token holders, of the developers, right? Because the issue is that if you look at Ethereum or Bitcoin or Starknet or any system, right? There is a certain distribution of power at any given point in time. And certainly now, before we've sort of reached global product market fit, 99% of humanity and 99% of developers and companies, they're not part of this. And it's a really hard challenge. How do you bring them in and offer them a way to participate but also be rewarded by it? Now, I don't know what all of the answers are, but this is something that is the most important, I think, challenge for any L1 or L2 out there. And we haven't solved it.
Yeah, I think beyond this, right, my next question will be, we all know that right now, no matter whether like sort of we think about it, but in general, we can see that on the supply side, we really have a lot of the rollups and sort of chains, right? And but then on the demand side, so we sort of like have the shortage of applications. I think that's the biggest difference between this cycle and the last cycle around like sort of DeFi summer. So on this topic, so in your opinion, what are the like sort of potential or promising applications we can see like can happen either sort of on Ethereum mainnet or on these different rollups, which can really drive the demands, or probably, as Ali mentioned, can bring in the other 99% of the companies or users into Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, a few categories, right? So one of them, obviously, DeFi, and I think, I mean, like, DeFi is something that just inherently takes some amount of time to get mature enough to be trusted, right? Because, like for someone managing their portfolio, the most important thing is not if they're getting 3% APY or 6% APY. The most important thing is not getting minus 100% APY. And so when something is immature, like the risk of a smart contract hack, the risk of the oracle breaking, the risk of something else happening, even something to the chain itself, like that's pretty high, right? And so it just inherently takes time for systems to de-risk, for things to mature, for us to get more assurance. But I feel like that's like actually been happening, right? And so, but then to me, the biggest challenge with DeFi is always like how to escape being like just a self-referential ecosystem, right? And so to me, the solution is like connection to the real world economy, right? And I mean, obviously, you know, we have US dollar stable coins, but I think we also need both other types of real world assets, including local stable coins, including company shares, also actually seeing like productive companies natively on chain, you know, and using like various types of DAO structures as a way to actually do that, right? So like actually native on chain, you know, like businesses, another form of real world asset. So that whole piece is one. Another piece is what I call info finance, right, which includes prediction markets, which I feel like have succeeded massively over the past year, and people are just already like regularly linking to them as a source of information. But to me, prediction markets are only one member of a much larger category that can be explored. It even includes a lot of interesting ideas, again, around governance. And I think in general, like governance and DAOs are like an important theme, and I think we've had a lot of challenges in the past, but also like AI in particular, I think massively expands the possible design space for that. Also decentralized social, I mean, a lot of protocols have been doing well. So there's a lot of like individual application verticals that I think are super interesting, and I'm sure, I mean, like both of these guys here have plenty of other examples that I've missed too.
Sure. I think among all of those, I'd point especially to the integration or connection between DeFi and TradFi as driving a lot of growth and change in how DeFi works, especially the connection to real-world assets that are rooted, whose value is rooted in the real economy. That seems quite important. AI is going to bring a lot of change, and it will bring probably more activity on chain as AI agents, in particular, start to act out on the intents or desires or directives of users. AI agents can trade more frequently, more quickly, and they care a lot about cost and speed. I'd also, in addition to social, point to gaming as a very important space. And of course, all of these are connected. One of the beauties of this space is that you can have systems, applications that combine elements of gaming, social, and finance all together. And the ability to connect these things together, I think, will be big. But then the last thing I'd say is, if the history of computing teaches us anything, is that it's often hard to see what the next killer application is going to be. So probably, if I had to bet, I might even put my money on none of the above.
So if for us, like the biggest utility, for at least for this year, and the thing we'd like to offer the world, it's one thing. It's Bitcoin. So Starknet, which of course is a layer 2 on Ethereum, is going to be the first what we call L2 squared, which is layer 2 that settles safely onto both Ethereum and Bitcoin. And already today, you can, if you're a Bitcoin holder, you can bridge your Bitcoin over. You can participate in things like staking it, generating yield on it. Basically, we want to take the expressibility that is best done on Ethereum and on its L2s and offer that to the store of value that is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the asset class that's the largest among all of crypto. It is an amazing store of value, but in terms of medium of exchange and doing things with your Bitcoin, if you have it, that's a huge unsolved problem. And for us, that's the #1 thing that we're trying to bring to the world this year.
Sounds good. It's like RWA, prediction market, decentralized social, gaming, and also this combination of Ethereum and also Bitcoin ecosystem. Yeah, it's quite diversified, I would say. And then my next question would be like, we are talking about like sort of scalability, and also all these kind of ideas around these like either Ethereum mainnet and also L2s, right? And then like how about security? And recently Vitaly mentioned about this multi-prover system, right? It's OPTE plus ZK and also the security console. Can you share a little bit more? And okay, what's the status in general and on the Arbitrum and also standard?
Yeah, so I think I'm trying to like solve for 3 problems at the same time here, right? So one problem is that I think the withdrawal window must decrease, right? 7 days is not acceptable, and I think even some of the more aggressive proposals like 2 or 3 days, like they're not acceptable, right? And I think we need to bring withdrawal periods down to 1 hour and eventually even 12 seconds, right? And to me, the basic reason is like we need interoperability to be effective, right? And we need, I mean, obviously users can move coins around through intents, but the problem is intents are just a fancy word for saying you pay someone else to wait a week for you, right? And like paying someone else to wait a week for you is expensive. So that's one problem. The other problem is that we want roll-ups to get to stage 2 in terms like, so this is the stage 0, stage 1, stage 2 framework that LCB now using. And the definition of stage 2 basically means it's full trustlessness, right? It means a roll-up is actually backed by cryptography, and there aren't like some kind of backdoors that a non-cryptographic thing could use to take the money out, right? The only situations in which non-cryptographic components are allowed to intervene are situations in which the code provably has a bug in it, right? And the third problem is that ZK proofs are still a bit immature. They still regularly have soundness bugs, and so we don't want to rely on them too much quite yet. Now, we have some really fascinating formal verification ZK EVM stuff happening, verified-zkevm.org, or talk to Justin Drake or Alex Hicks. They're wonderful people. It's a wonderful site, but like that's still a little bit in the future, and I think we want to really improve things for people now, right? And so how do you solve for all 3 at the same time, right? One is, in the normal case, like we basically make a 2 out of 3, right? In the normal case, we want at least 2 of the proof systems to be instant, right? Optimistic requires waiting 7 days. ZK and TE, they qualify. We also want 2 out of 3 to be purely cryptographic, right? We want to like push things up to the threshold of relying, like majority reliance on cryptographic trust, and so ZK and OP cover there. And we want to rely on things that are relatively proven, and so OP and TE are both covered there, and ZK is newer, right? And so if you make a 2 of 3 out of those, then like it actually manages to solve those 3 things at the same time, right? And so for me, this is this kind of like a really nice and like surprisingly simple architecture that like gets at a lot of goals at the same time in the short term in a pretty nice way. And like I think we should start from things like this, and I think we should also like iterate on them and like improve all of the different types of proof system further at the same time.
Yep. So multi-prover, multi-mode prover is a big part of the way that we're thinking about the future of proving. And I actually yesterday gave a talk over on stage 2 about laying out, thinking about multi-prover approach on next generation proving. And I think the core question is well, what if there's a bug in the trusted computing base of the chain? Right? That is, trusted computing base in security lingo means all of the code whose correctness you're relying on for the safety and liveness of your system. And that includes not only the provers, it also includes the code about which you're proving. That is a state transition function, which typically includes something like a big chunk of reth or geth or something similar. It also includes the compiler toolchain that you use to take that state transition function source code and turn it into whatever it is you're proving over. So I think what you really want is a system that gives you the best resilience against those sorts of bugs. And this is why I differ a little bit from the 2 out of 3 approach, the pure 2 out of 3 approach, because 2 of those modes, ZK proving and optimistic proving, both rely on the assumption that the, say, the machine code that you're proving over is correct.
TEs do as well.
And TEs do as well, right. And so I think you need, in addition to those purely mechanized proving mechanisms, mechanisms that rely on some kind of human judgment. That is, there is a role for a Security Council. The challenge is how you make it so the Security Council doesn't, the ability of Security Council to act doesn't cause a lot of delay. And I'm not going to re-give my talk from yesterday up here. Just point you to the fact to expect some writing from our team laying this out over time. I think it's a really important issue. I think multi-mode proving is the future. But if I could, just one more thing. I want to differ from Vitalik in a friendly and respectful way in one other place, which is I don't think that you need to wait for proving in order to have intent-based cross-chain interop. I think you can do that faster than proving. And I think that's the future, that you want to be able to do it faster than proving, because proving will always be at least 12 seconds.
Okay, so I also want to respectfully disagree. I'm a ZK Stark maxi. I think that going multi-mode proving is actually not the right way to go. And usually, if you take